So now we configured our hardware and installed the software. Now it's time to log into the system. So we enter the IP address of the core here. Then we get this login screen, and here we enter the credentials that we used during setup. So now we are logged in, and as you can see, there is nothing here. Everything is empty, and that's because we did not configure anything. So we go to the setup icon, and the first thing we need to do is we have to switch to the devices section, and then we click on discover devices. And now it gives us a list of executors that are found in this particular network. So I have two executors, one that is on the APU, which is controlling the single TRP cube. And then we have one executor running on the NetPicks that is controlling the 2x2 wall and the 1x2 on the left. Click on connect on both executors, and then they are appended to the device list here. And before I can use them, I have to accept the connection. So now I have my two executors connected to the core, and I can start configuring my system. The first thing that I want to do is I want to configure a wall. If I have an LED screen that I drive, I personally would prefer to work with screens. I will show this later, but for now, let's go with walls. I go to the wall section and click the add, and then I enter a name for the wall. So the first one that I want to create is the 2x2 here in the center, and then I can enter a grid width and a grid height. So this grid, what I define here, is used for the graphical representation of the wall later in the GUI. So it has nothing to do with the physical numbers of screens that we have here. So I could leave this as 1, or I could set this to any size I want. It's just how the grid of the wall is represented in the GUI, and my sources can snap to this grid. So it makes maybe sense in this case to have this 2x2 grid here, and so that each screen is represented by a rectangle later in the GUI. But I can set this to anything that I want and what might be meaningful for my project. The next option I have to choose is which display I want to use. You remember we configured on NetPicks, we configured two display groups. One is with 4 screens and one with only these 2 screens. And because I want to drive the 2x2, which is connected to this display group, I choose 3840 by 2160. Yeah, then I click OK, and my first wall is created. So let's create the second one. The one on the right, the slim cube wall. So this is the grid width is 1 and the height is 2. Select the display group that is responsible for that wall. So this is 1920 by 2160. I did this, and my third wall is the single TRP cube. So name is TRP. Leave the grid width, and in that case I have to select the APU executor, which is connected to that screen. So if I now switch to my GUI and I click on the walls section, I see that I have my 3 walls here, and if I select one, then I also see this is the grid that I set up when I configured the wall. So this is my big wall, and this is my single wall. What I also can see is if I go here now to the sources, by default, if I select a wall that has, which executor has a physical input, I have by default these source executor here, and I can see here the inputs. So in the NetPicks, there are 3 input cards installed, and each input card has 2 input. So I have in total 6 hardware inputs. If I go to the 2x2, I see the same because it's the same executor that is running on that machine. So I also see the 6 inputs. So the executor knows there are hardware inputs, and it populates it automatically to the sources if a wall is selected with that executor. If I switch to TRP, the TRP is served by the APU, which has no hardware inputs. And if I go to the sources list here, I do not see anything because I did not configure any sources at this time. Yeah, this is the basic setup that we have to start with. So we start with our devices, configure our devices, and the next step is that we configure our walls.